Okay, we want to make a fidget spinner. We'll use Blender. I wanted to look at the dimensions of the spinner. Given a 608 bearing, the outer diameter of the bearing is 22 millimeters, and I wanted a 4 millimeter thickness of the plastic, so that ends up being, well, 15 millimeter radius on the outside here. So this 3, that's a radius of 15 or a diameter of 30, and so that gives, if all things being equal, a distance from center to center of 30 millimeters. And I think that's about all we need to know, other than the inside diameter of the cap would be 8 millimeters, and the thickness of the whole thing is going to be 7. So let's get to it. I'll close this. And we'll open up Blender. So here's just a fresh opening of Blender 3.2, and we'll start with a general file. I'll hit A on the keyboard to select everything, and then the delete key on the keyboard to get rid of everything. Just want a clean sheet. I want to set up the units also. Since we're using millimeters, we can go to the units. So there's a bunch of tabs on the right here, and one of the tabs is the scene properties, which looks like a little cone and a cylinder, a sphere or something. Anyway, if I go to units, they're already metric. The default Blender unit is a meter, and that's a little much. So I'm going to set the scale to 1,000th and set my display units. Well, the only one I care about is linear numbers here, so millimeters. So the default unit is going to be a millimeter because that's the 1,000th of a meter, and my display units will be millimeters. There's one other setting here, is the grids. I want to put that scale to 1,000th also. And so that's just on my viewport overlays here, and I just set the scale here to 1,000th. Okay, so I'm going to start drawing the spinner in 2D and give it an extrusion, which is kind of challenging with Blender, but I looked up a way, and maybe I'll put a link in the description of who I stole the ideas from. Anyway, I'll hit 7 on the keypad, right? Not the keyboard, unless you go to Preferences and Emulate. I don't even know where it is. Navigation, probably. Where I emulate the keypad. Well, maybe it's Input or something. Anyway, somewhere, yeah. I can emulate a 3-button mouse if you don't have a 3-button mouse, or you can emulate the number pad on the right, the 10 keypad on the right. Anyway, I'm all good with a 3-button mouse and a keypad on my keyboard, so I'm good there. So I'll close that. So I'll hit 7 on the keyboard, and then I'm going to zoom in, and so I can see the grids. Once I zoom in to where the grids kind of stop regenerating, then I know I'm looking at millimeters. So I'll zoom out just a little bit so I can see like 30 millimeters or so. Okay, so now I'm going to Shift A, which is add a object, right? So I think you could probably go to Object. Well, I don't even know where you do it here. Add, yeah, and then you can do mesh and curves and stuff. But keyboard shortcuts, Shift A, and that keeps your mouse in the center of your screen. It's a little bit faster. Notice I move my mouse off of it, and it goes away. So Shift A, and I'm going to start with a curve and a circle. Makes sense? And I'm going to put a circle there, and I'll type in the radius, and I'm going to start with that 15 millimeter radius. However, if I zoom out, it gives me a huge, there you go, circle, so I can change the size of it. Now, this box down here in the lower left is going to go away if you do something else, like add something else. So I lose the ability to scale my circle. So I'm going to type it into 15, and it actually gets bigger. So maybe I don't need to put that 1,000. I'll just put that back to 1. See what that does. Yeah, that's better. Now each grid is a millimeter. Before it was 1,000th of a millimeter. In older versions, this is a brand new version, but anyway. So yeah, don't do that. Just leave the grid scale, and it does the whole scene scale over here to 1,000th, so I'm good to go. So also the location, I want to put that at 30 in the X direction. Okay. Now before I make, I'm going to end up making 6 copies of it in a perfect hexagon, but I want to increase the resolution of it. And right now it's a Bezier curve, and I can hit Tab key to look at the handles. So, you know, I can, well, with the move tool, I can grab, here's a move tool, and I can grab these handles of these points on the circle and change the curvature, and there we go, and change the curvature. Yeah, it's acting a little weird. If I and if I click on there, that little box in the middle, I can move it in the X and Y, so I can constrain it. So we'll use that shortly. But what I want to do is add more. So I can right click and subdivide, and that puts an extra vertex or anchor point on the curve. I'm going to do that a few times. So down here I get another box, and let's go 3. So now I have a much higher resolution circle. Okay, well, let's get out of edit mode. I can hit, I can go back up here and go to object mode, or I can hit tab to toggle between them. Okay, so I want to do one more thing, and that is, before I start moving around, I'm going to set the origin to the 3D cursor, which is that red and white little icon or cursor in the center. So now I can see that little orange dot that was in the center of my circle is now at the center of my 3D cursor. So now when I rotate it, which I'll do in a second, after I do a Shift D, which is duplicate, it turns head so I can move it around. I'll hit R for rotate, and now it's rotating about the center, which I just changed. And then I'm going to type in 60 degrees, which will actually put it, because it's 30 units away, and a 60 degrees will make these two circles tangent. So I'm going to type in 60. Oh, well, and that's by default. And I wanted to make sure that I get in the right angle. So let's hit a right click to stop that, and I'm going to do an R, Z, and 60, and enter. So Z forces it to be constrained to rotate around the Z axis. So I wanted to make sure that it was rotating in the XY plane or around the Z axis, if that makes sense. So once I've done it once, I can repeat this operation by a Shift R, or I could duplicate that again and rotate it around the Z 60 degrees. But a Shift R will do the same thing, but it won't do the duplicate again. So let's undo that, and Shift D and R, Z 60, right? And then Shift D and Shift R. Perhaps that doesn't do that anymore. So RZ 60. Anyway, Shift D, R, Z 60. Used to be able to just do a Shift R and it would do that for you. Anyway, Shift D, R, Z 60 one more time. And now I have 6 circles, all of a radius of 13, and they're all tangent to each other. And this should be almost all I need. So I'm going to zoom out just a teeny bit, and I'm going to add a plane, so Shift A, and under Mesh I can add a plane. Now this plane is kind of big, so I'm going to knock that down to, well, let's try 100 millimeters. There. And I'm on object mode, so there we go. And I'm going to select all these circles, and I'm going to pivot around a little bit. What I want to do is move these circles up. So yeah, just deselected them. Or I could just select the plane and Control I inverts the selection, and then G for grab and Z for the Z direction. See, I get the blue Z. I'm going to lift those up a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to shift click on the plane and go to the top view again. I'm going to hit tab. So now I'm holding the shift key and my middle mouse wheel as a button and dragging it, and that pans. Without the shift key, it orbits around like this. Okay, and 7, go back to top view. So with the 6 circles selected first, mind you, and the plane selected last, I can go to Mesh and Knife Project, which is an odd thing to think about, but here it is. And now what this did, let's see if we can see, this projected those circles onto that plane, and so it cut faces out of that plane in the shapes of those circles. And because I increased the resolution of those circles, I should get a nice fine curvature around for my fidget spinner. So we should be able to select the faces. So I can hit 3 on the keyboard, not the pad, and that switches to my face mode, if you will. So I can select, well, let's go to shaded view here. So I can select and shift click the different faces, and I'm going to select these 3 as well. And so we can see the unselected faces of the fidget spinner that we're going to end up with. And then I'm going to hit X for delete. I don't want those faces. And I want to just do only faces. Well, I kind of want to get rid of those edges, but well, I'll show you. If I delete and do like a dissolve faces or dissolve edges, and it doesn't work. And what about only edges and faces? That still doesn't work. And I don't think there is a collapse edges and faces. No, that's the invert of that. So really the only thing I can do is only the, did I try that one? No, yeah. Just faces. There we go. That's what, that is what I wanted to do. However, I still have 4 faces here, so I want to select them all. And then right click and dissolve faces. So now it's all one face. And so if you want to see how many vertices I have with this, it's pretty neat. Go hit 1 on the keyboard. So now I have a lot, and there's a few right where the circles are touching that may be out of place. So I think I actually want to fix that. So again, I hit 1 on the keyboard to go to vertex mode, and I'm going to shift drag my middle mouse wheel. Oh, let's get out of edit mode, so tab, and then pivot around here. I'm going to delete these, I don't need these circles anymore. Just hit the delete key, it doesn't give me an option. If I do that, go back to top view and tab, and there are my vertices. And I'm going to hit, just click out in the middle of nowhere to deselect, and I'm going to try to edit some of these wayward vertices just a little bit. Right there. And I'm going to use the move tool. Zoom in just a little bit more. Yeah, it probably isn't that big of a deal, but you know, you want a smooth fidget spinner, right? There's another setting where you can get the blender to zoom on your mouse cursor so it doesn't wig out when you zoom. It's a little finger gymnastics to pan and zoom quickly. Oops, just missed it. Okay, shift, drag, there's a setting to invert that, so you can just pan with the mouse wheel and then shift pan to orbit or pivot your screen. Okay, I think I went all the way around now. No, I didn't. All right, that should be okay. Now I'll go back to hit 3 on the keyboard, and that switches to face mode. And I'll pivot around so I can see it, and then I'll select the face and extrude it. So E for extrude. And that gives, I can move my mouse, I'll just type in 7 because that's the thickness of the fidget spinner, or the thickness of the actual 608 bearing, and enter. That looks pretty good, but I want rounded edges, so I have this top face selected. You can see unselected, selected. And then pivot around, shift, click the bottom one, so now I have both the top and bottom edges. And there's actually a bevel tool over here somewhere. Yeah, right here. Go ahead and click that. And then grab this bevel tool. I'm just going to move it a little bit and then change the number. That width is going to be 1/2 of 7, so 3.5. And right here where the shape is at 0.5, that makes it round, right? But it's not round because I don't have enough segments. So I'm going to increase the segments, and you can see how it makes it round. Now what I'm looking at is, I don't think that was enough, so Control B, and then I can move my mouse a little bit if I don't crash the machine. And just click and make sure 3.5. And I have 8 segments. Kind of want to maybe click there and let's go 12. And what I'm looking for is the edges, the faces to be roughly pretty square, and so they look pretty square to me. And so that makes a nice round edge, as round as the curvature and so forth. So I'm seeing a little bit of pinching there, but yeah, I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing. So good. Let's get out of edit mode now. And there's a few things I want to do to clean up. I don't know that I actually need to clean anything up. Now, if I had gone a little higher resolution, maybe I would have had some of these edges cross each other. And if that was the case, I would have gone to my modifier, little wrench here, and used a decimate modifier. And you can see what it does. Right now at a ratio of 1, it doesn't do anything. But I put 0.8 in or something, and I should see it do something. Oh, I'm still in edit mode. How did get rid of that? Object mode. Okay. Now, decimate. And it may be easier to see in wireframe view. And 0.8. And it takes out vertices it doesn't feel necessary, which actually reduces the file size and things. And, you know, 0.8, I doubt you'll notice, so we'll leave it at that. 0.8, 0.9, or you could leave it at 1. I don't think you'll have any problems at 1 either. So, in fact, let's just leave it at 1. Yeah, just leave it like that, because I don't think any are crossing anyway, so it's going to be a perfectly manifold surface, watertight surface. So let me just get rid of that modifier. Okay, now I'm going to put the holes in it, right? I want to for the bearings and the counterweights. So let's go back to here. And I'm not worried about the facets here. That's just the smoothing algorithm that it's using. And maybe this does point out that maybe I didn't get my vertices quite smooth enough, but we'll just leave it. Okay, I'm going to add Shift A cylinder now. And this one's going right in the center, and it has a radius of 1,000 millimeters right now. The outside radius should be 11 for a diameter of 22. And I'm going to add a bunch more vertices, like 64, maybe even more. How about 96? Again, I'm trying to get roughly the same size faces. That's even kind of big. 128, keep the powers of 2. Yeah, the more you have, the slower it's going to be, but be nice and smooth. Okay, so what I want to do is duplicate that and move it to the the 3 other spots where the counterweights go. So Shift D, and then I'm going to GX 30, right? So G is grab, in other words move, and then in the X direction 30 units. There I go. Okay, top view. Oh. Yeah, they're still a little tall, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, they're really tall. I should have changed that. But anyway, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to right click and set the origin to the 3D cursor and rotate this, Shift D, RZ 120 now. That puts it there. Shift D, RZ 120. Okay, now I'm going to select all 3 of these, all 4 of these cylinders, and I'm going to make a collection out of them. So add, move to collection. I'll just make a new collection. Just collection 2, that's fine, because I'm only going to use it once. So now I'm going to pick the body of the fidget spinner, and I'm going to add a modifier, still in the modifier, and I'm going to add a Boolean, right? The Boolean is already on difference, and the operand type is on object, but I'm going to move it to collection. It's going to slow it down a teeny bit, and pick collection 2. Okay, and it's on difference, which I'll subtract, and I'll go ahead and apply. May take a minute. Okay, probably did it. So now I'm going to select the cylinders and delete them. And now I have the holes in my fidget spinner, and it looks okay to me. So be ready. I think that's ready, almost ready to print. But I know that if I go ahead and print this thing, the holes are going to be a little bit too small. So I'm going to scale this up a little bit. So S, and that scales it. But I don't want it thicker, right? So I'm going to do a Shift Z. So now it only scales in the X and Y directions. Okay, this can be done in the slicer as well, but you know, it's nice to do it right here. Okay, so 1.02, so that's 2% bigger, and I think with the way it prints, that should work to fit the bearings and the counterweights. Okay, now I'm ready to export this to an STL file, which the 3D printing slicer goes, and I'll not bore you with these details, but there it is.